Welcome to the Swipe Right Effect podcast, where we will be sharing with you the power to get unstuck by swiping right on yourself. Your host, author C.K. Collins, aka Kelly, gets personal with her guests, sharing stories of themselves getting unstuck with wisdom and guidance. Where do you feel stuck? Are you waiting to get your new life started after a big change? You've come to the right place. So with that said, let's get started.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Swipe Right Effect, episode 9. Today, we're going to meet with Susan Gold. She's a magical personality, a magical person. Let me tell you a little bit about her before we get started. Navigating a ferociously challenging upbringing while bravely moving forward as an adult to face ingrained, outdated, and patriarchal programming head on. Susan now shares a unique perspective in viewing life challenges as occasions for transformation. Through her book, Toxic Family: Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom, Susan turns the standard paradigm on its head, courageously leading others through her own journey of abuse, addiction, and surviving narcissism, all while creating a distinctively empowering personal and professional life. Welcome, Susan. I'm excited to get going.
Kelly, I'm really glad to be here with you today. Thank you for having me.
I really enjoyed checking out your website and reading a bit of your book. And I'm so impressed with how you did tackle things. I guess that's my personality. So I just completely related to you in everything I read. I like to tackle things myself. So, but I've been doing a lot of work on intuition, I think. And I know that you work with that and meditation and some deeply spiritual practices. So I'd love to dive in and talk about intuition, maybe describe a moment when you allowed your intuition to lead you.
Well, I'm really glad you're bringing up the topic of intuition, because in 2007, I was told by an Irish seer I had a book to write, and I just shoved that under the carpet so quickly. I did not want to go through that for a PR tool. And then back to back 2019 and I think early 2020, I had two intuitives tell me I had a book to write. And the last one told me I had 3 books to write. So I was like, I guess I better get going before this is a real library of books. Oh boy, intuition was so strong when I was a child growing up in my family home, and it's a way that I stayed safe. I was highly empathic, meaning I could really connect into someone's energy and sort of read them and understand where they were and what they needed emotionally and specifically. And I think many of us women tend to be empathic. And I was also highly telepathic. I don't want to get too Southern California hooey on you, even though I now live in rural Northwest Montana. I could read thoughts of adults until it got me into so much trouble, because adults didn't really want to hear what a 10-year-old had to say, even if it was truthful. So I compartmentalized it. I put it away. But intuition has really served me throughout my existence thus far on the planet. I knew intuitively I needed to stay focused on how I was going to move on from my family home. And I did the morning after I graduated from high school. I think it was 7:45 in the morning. And, the car was packed. And I was terrified, because even though my family system was toxic, it was chaotic, I had grown accustomed to it. And it took great courage to walk away and not be sure what was ahead of me. And I certainly didn't have standard tools issued. I had a very bumpy ride up to that point. And I knew intuitively early in my 20s, something was awry and I needed to address some issues, because I was having similar experiences that I had in the home where I grew up. I was in a toxic relationship. It was very dramatic. It was easy easy for me to tell lies when it would have been just as easy to tell truth. I took a slug from a wine jug at work, just like my dad popped the cork off the bourbon bottle at 7:30 a.m. So these were all intuitive messages, and luckily I paid heed. I got help. I got clean and sober early. I've been sober for decades. I was struck with clinical depression. I was in the middle of a business deal that replicated the role that I played between my parents as mediator.
Wow.
And it actually caused me to split out of self, go into clinical depression. And I was lucky to have support around me, and got to a treatment center and got help. But the whole way along, that small, still voice has been with me. But sometimes I just wanted to repress her. And sometimes it was just a flicker of a flame. And I felt like it could go out at any moment. And I could leave this earth so easily, but she's led me.
So was your intuition, sounds like it was leading you to leave bad situations, which is good and super healthy. But was your intuition also providing kind of a path forward? So I'm leaving this and I'm going forward to that, or were you having to just step out into the world, not really knowing where you wanted to go?
So I always had drive and ambition. I think the perfect storm when I paid heed to the intuition most clearly was in my own divorce. I had been with my partner for, I think, 13 years. We've been married for over 11. And I felt more and more drained, and I didn't quite understand why. I was pulling more than my fair share of the bills. And I just couldn't get him to stand up and take responsibility. And finally, I decided, well, a postnuptial agreement might help. And we got to the last bone of contention to be negotiated. And I felt, oh, my marriage is going to be saved, even though I knew it was well past the expiration date. But I didn't want it to disintegrate because my parents' marriage had failed. And I didn't want a failing relationship, a marriage, especially with a child who was 10 at the time. So he got to the last point. His eyes went in those cold lizard-like slits. And he folded his arms and he said, I'm hiring an attorney and I'm filing for divorce. And I heard the intuition then come over my right shoulder, probably the clearest that I've heard. And it said, this is the universe doing for you what you cannot do for yourself.
Isn't
And
that amazing?
yeah, I held on to that for the year it took.
And once it happens to you, it's so incredible how you see it happen to other people. And I've probably said that a dozen times to people now, and they're just like, I hate my job. I hate my job. I hate my job. And then something happens within the job and it makes it super obvious you have to walk away, or you see somebody lose their job and you're like, you needed to leave that job a year ago. And now the universe has done for you what you couldn't do for yourself. And I think that's, but I'm not sure I would have recognized it had the universe not done that for me. So I think it's good to talk about that, because sometimes when something big happens, it's not always easy to go, oh, well, here's the positive in that. And the positive, oftentimes the positive in that is you couldn't make that call for yourself. You couldn't pull out of that situation. And I think that this would probably be a great time to talk about narcissism, because I know people and have been in a situation myself where I was in a narcissistic relationship. And I think people are in, and I don't mean just in romantic relationships, but also friendships can be very difficult to get out of when you're friends with a narcissist. And so since you're a coach, let's talk about how you would coach someone who's in the middle of getting out of a relationship with a narcissist, but maybe even more specifically divorcing a narcissist. How do you coach somebody through that?
Well, first you have to understand that you're in that type of relationship. I was in complete denial. My father was very narcissistic. My oldest brother has those traits. And I worked in an industry that's riddled with narcissism. I lived in a city that's swelling with narcissists from every crevice and cranny. So I think I first Googled the word when I was about a year away from understanding that I was living with and married to a narcissist. The only advice that I have for someone who wakes up to the fact that they're with a narcissist in a marriage and they now want to divorce a narcissist is no contact and modified contact if you have a child. But I cannot even begin to describe the importance. And I will just share that once we got back from that mediation session where my husband announced he was filing for divorce, he wouldn't leave the master bedroom. And by my choice, I carried a mattress across our home into a partial conversion in our garage. And I made that room a monastery. I stayed there for 1 year. This was a home I bought, paid for, and maintained for our family. And I held no contact. I won't call it a home anymore. I'll say it was more a domicile. Took all my experience meditating, those week-long silent meditation retreats of not speaking and not making eye contact. And so that's what I did for 1 year until I was able to write him his 6-figure check and send him on his way. And that's what was successful. I didn't fight child custody because I knew ultimately he'd slip. It would be inconvenient. And I ended up taking care of our son probably 100% of the time after the first year or so was finished, and he was on to his next source of supply. The other thing that I advise is do not try to make the narcissist accountable, and do not hold on to the rage. Feel the rage, but you will never make the narcissist accountable. It's not possible. And they are astounding wizards at manipulation and at gaslighting. So it's really hard to go through that circumstance and not feel a victim or a martyr. But I had to hold on to that gentle voice of intuition. This is the universe doing for you what you cannot do for yourself. And every time the resentment would mushroom up, I'd let it up and out and release it appropriately. Somatic work was imperative. It was wonderful to get a narrative down that was linear and came from my brain that was verbal. But what was most important was to go into the body where the trauma pockets are holding that trauma. And it wasn't just this relationship. It went back. And it went back further than my generation. It's in the lineage of my family on both sides. And to really work with that and understand it, it's not easy to do. And one of the things that my husband did was to turn family members and friends against me. I had one aunt and uncle that lived in California, and they sided with him, which was painful, but I could clearly see he was setting it up even before we had even discussed divorce. I could clearly see it. And ultimately, that uncle came back to me 2 years later when his own daughter was experiencing a divorce from one we also feel was a narcissist. And he told my cousin, whatever Susan did, do. It works.
Wow. That's amazing. Well, you mentioned the meditation practice. Do you does that when you began meditating, or how do you use that kind of in your life now? And because I know now you've moved to Montana and you're taking care of dogs and cats and you rescue things and you have your partner and you're just in a completely different setting from LA and New York where you did all that work with celebrities. So what's the difference between then and now, and what's your daily practice now?
When I began, it was very structured. It was in the 90s in New York City in my therapist's studio apartment. There were 9 of us squeezed in there for a half-day meditation retreat, and I thought I was going to climb the walls. Like I came in with this concept of this chattery brain should be totally silent at points at least, and it was agony sitting on the cushion. And then I came slowly to understand that, even enlightened masters hardly ever have a moment of silence or even an instant, and that it's all just part of the process to watch the thoughts and let them go. And it gave me clarity, it gave me peace, it gave me understanding, and it gave me a way to get off that hamster wheel that I had been running on because my central nervous system was so overtaxed. And even though I had done gobs of work and so many different modalities, PTSD was still prevalent. So meditation really helped me get in the moment and get clarity, get that intuition even more crystal clear. And then it's become a different thing. I used to be a total taskmaster, go on week-long silent meditation retreats and have a daily practice and sit on the cushion no matter what, blah, blah. And then I went, wow, this is really punishing. So now when the cushion calls me, I sit, and it could be for 2 minutes, it could be for 10, it could be an hour. It just, whatever I feel I'm drawn to, or it could be a walk down the road with a dog. It could be watching the geese like fly by or the elk pass the window. It's become much different than it used to be for me.
Yeah. Well, I know meditation was a big part, and yoga both were, practices that helped me get through the worst times of my life. But once I retired and I started traveling all over the place, I was in a, different country in a different city, and it became like my little home base. That, like you said, that cushion was, I could get over, even no matter how much fun it was and how inspiring it was and how it was helping me heal. That cushion, as you put it, was always that safe place I could go no matter where I was. It's almost like treating it like home. The cushion is home instead of a house structure or an apartment or even an Airbnb. That if the cushion is home, then you can always go there no matter where you are. It's very healing, but also what's the right word? Just relaxing. And whether you're in a happy, traveling situation that can be stressful, or you're in just every single day of your life is stressful, it's still a home base for finding your own peace. And yoga was that way for me too. It was so easy for me to dive into yoga, and I would just let everything else melt away. It took a lot of practice to be able to do that, but I think it's those two things, and love and support of all my friends and family helped me heal. But there was so much, the PTSD was so real that's where I ended up going for healing. And there's a lot of modalities, like you said, that people can use, but meditation and yoga were paramount for mine. So can you describe a moment of truth that you've experienced in your life?
Yeah, I think the biggest moment of truth was I had just left ICM, which was a large global talent agency, to work in a studio apartment with my boss, because I knew I'd learn how to negotiate talent deals, celebrity talent deals. And I couldn't learn that at this big agency. Just everything was behind closed doors. So I went and discovered this gentleman had a issue with a sexual addiction and used to invite young women in for their moment to read on his casting couch and asked me to leave, which was awkward enough. And then he tried the same thing with me. And I was so shocked, and it brought so much of my past up. And the next morning at 7 a.m., I rang Barbara Walters' doorbell, and Barbara was an exercise client of mine. There had been watching her growing up, and here she was, and I was training her for a little extra cash on the side. And she took one look at me and she said, "Susan, what is up with you?" And she got it out of me and she said, "I'm coming to work with you this morning and we're going to confront this man together." And I was like, "Yeah, that's okay, Barbara. I think I got this one covered." And I went, and I was really nervous to confront this man, but I knew I had to be true to myself. And I knew that this was very inappropriate. I was newly sober. I was just out of an abusive relationship myself, where the man held the purse strings. I'm embarrassed to say, but it was true. And I was terrified to lose my job, but I knew I couldn't live with myself otherwise. And I confronted him. And he said, "Do you have everything you need?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Great, you're fired." And with 2.5 months of cash in the bank, and even though Barbara had offered me an assistantship with her then fiance, who was running a large movie company, I said, "No, I can't do it. I can't be somebody else's assistant." And I launched my own talent brokerage firm and became known for matching celebrities to brands. And that was really accepting truth. That was a brave way for me to accept truth and to step forward.
Yeah. It's, I don't know if that was the universe telling you something again, but it's terrifying. And I do see, I look at young women in situations where it's an all male environment and there's no woman there to mentor her. And I'm glad you have Barbara, because you just don't know. I mean, I have 3 daughters and they really help each other through things, and they come to me when, they feel like they need me. But it would be so amazing to have someone like that in a workplace with you that's willing to share their wisdom, but also give you a hand up when you need it, or even just an ear to listen to. But I think that it's hard. And when that Me Too movement came out, I think the world started to see it, but a lot of the world didn't want to believe it. And
yeah, I think they've shoved it under the carpet again pretty directly, Kelly. And I know we had a few minutes to talk before we had our conversation, and I know this is your podcast, but I would love for you to tell us about your mentoring program that you've created, because I'm so excited by it.
yeah, well, it's called Momentum, because I want women to help women get momentum in their careers, but more importantly in their life. And it's very much about defining life purpose outside work and having a vision for yourself outside work, but also about having a wealth mindset that is healthy. A lot of people who've been in a marriage, like you said, that you had not held the purse strings in that first big relationship. And I think it's really important. I've advised all 3 of my daughters to say, you pay the bills, where the money is. A joint checking account happens when the bills are paid out of that. And I just think it's, those are things that people don't necessarily get advice from their mother or their father, and other women could share things like that. Not necessarily advice, but life experience. And I also think it's really important to think about your personal brand. Like, how do you want to present yourself? I mean, you worked with brands all the time, and you were able to match celebrities with that. Well, if you don't know what your life purpose is and you don't have a vision for yourself, your wealth mindset's not healthy, your personal brand's probably a mess. So, and that's a personal brand I want you to be able to look in the mirror and be proud of, not a personal brand for the rest of the world. Who do you want to be and how do you want to live your life is how I see branding. And then mentoring, once you kind of go through the rest of the program, and the 6-month program ends with mentoring. And my plan is, and I want to definitely be flexible about this because I know women get to different stages of their life at different times, but I'd love for it to be 50-year-olds mentoring 40-year-olds and 40-year-olds mentoring 30-year-olds. I wish I'd had it, and I have 3 daughters and I want them to have it. So I think it's important. And, just listening to all of your experiences, how much easier, not easier is probably not the right word, but how much more helpful would it have been had you had somebody who was standing by you, as a friend or a mentor. And I'm sure you did have friends, but it's just an interesting situation that all women are in, that are out in the working world, that they need connection more than anything. That's the tagline of Momentum, is where wise women connect. So that's, but thank you for asking. That was very nice of you. You didn't have to do that. So let's talk about spirituality. I think, we talked about, I think when people think, I hear woo-woo all the time, and I've definitely become more woo-woo as I've gotten older, because I have been diving into what my spiritual truth looks like. And I did, when I was immediately after my marriage split, I did a spiritual hike called the Camino de Santiago in Spain. And I was exposed to so many different cultures and their spiritualities. It really opened up my mind. I mean, I grew up a Christian and in a Methodist church, Protestant, and was in youth group, and I raised my family the same way. And it was much later in life that spiritual truth even became something that I sought. And so I'd love for you to talk about that, but I think that you can talk about a very specific spiritual truth, or even how you'd coach somebody to find their own.
Well, I have to thank my mom. She was devout in her own practice of religion. And she really taught me faith and belief in the mystic and the magical. And I really appreciated that. And later, when she went through her divorce, she got into so many different gurus and different types of spirituality and meditation, and just open to alternative ways to eat and all sorts of things. So it really opened my horizons. And when I got clean and sober, that was my ticket to really explore, because I believe I'd been seeking. I just didn't understand what that really meant. And ultimately, I've been grateful to be open to so many different modalities, and to come to the understanding that I believe we're all one, all of us. I believe that my challenges and my challengers are all opportunities for soul evolution, and that there's beauty in all of it. My book is called Toxic Family: Transforming Childhood Trauma into Adult Freedom. Like, how can I write a book like that? Believe that this is all soul evolution. That wasn't my title. It's my publisher's title, but I think it's an appropriate title. My title was Magical Illumination, because that's what I feel it's been. And I have great love for all that I've been through. And I think that's practical spirituality. And I think my definition of spirituality is taking off the layers one at a time of that black encrusted mud and saran wrap and duct tape and sticky glue that has been piled on top of this beautiful heart that's been my gift as a human being. And to open that and let the light shine through, and now be able to beam that to others.
How do you feel like that spirituality connects with I guess it's all together, but really like the spiritual mind and the healthy body. Like, how do you feel like those connect?
Well, I think it's two in one, but it took me a while. I was heavy into endurance sport. I was marathoning, I was triathloning. When that fell apart, I was into masters swimming and had a national ranking within 4 years because the focus was so intense. But really, I needed that persona to be ripped away so I could see the truth in it. I, again, was trying to prove worth, trying to prove value, and absolutely bludgeoning my body to receive that. And ultimately, I couldn't walk around my block. I was in excruciating and chronic pain for almost 2 years until I found a way through. And I believe that's all part of growing and accepting who I am
Mm.
as a loving being, and to honor myself and to grow compassion, not just for you, Kelly, but for my own walk and what I've been through and what I've experienced and what I've traversed. So that's my connection between spirituality and a healthy body.
Yeah. Yeah, that's amazing. I think I used to run to love marathons and got to a point where I had a health crisis, and I realized how much of the running was my alone time, my spiritual talk myself through things time. And so the challenge of finding a new way to do that is brought me back around to yoga, probably for about the fourth time. And then it was several years before I had the traumatic ending of the divorce. Um, so when people are going through trauma, whether it's narcissism or it's just a divorce, even just a plain old or splitting up kind of divorce, or the loss of a parent or the loss of a child, people tend to numb in a lot of different ways, whether that's alcohol or drugs or extreme sports. There's all different kinds of numbing or addiction. So what would you say to someone who thinks they might have an issue or even knows they have an issue and they want to get clean? Since it's been decades, you went there, you stayed there. So what would you say to somebody who's having issues with that because of trauma?
Well, first, I'd suggest gentle kindness towards their own being and their own beautiful soul. And then the next time you pick up that vodka and tonic or go out for that 12-mile run when you're hurting and your precipice of injury is right there and immediate, or you're acting out sexually, you just say, is this the kindest thing I can do to my being?
Wow. I've never heard anybody say that before. That's beautiful. I love that.
Pass it on, Kelly.
Totally gonna pass that on. You need to come to my retreat and let's talk about that with everybody. That would be awesome. Okay, well, unfortunately, we're coming up on the end of time that we have. So I try to ask everybody at the end of each podcast, what feeds your soul, Susan?
Hands down, nature. And just the magic of that bird looking at me for a moment, and the connection, or freeing that moth that I'd really rather swat and watching it fly away, that feeds my soul.
Yeah, I totally agree. I'm into hummingbird these days. I love watching hummingbirds. They're just so social, and you can tell they want to connect with you, and it's just super cool. It just fills my heart for sure. Well, tell our listeners how they can find out more information about you and your book and your coaching and all the things you want to share.
Only if you feel drawn, and you'll know. Just go to susangold.us. Everything's there.
susangold.us. All right. Thank you for sharing. I really appreciate you sharing your story and and your victory over all of these things. You've been great. So thank you for today. And I hope to see you again for sure.
Thank you, Kelly.
Kelly's book is available on Amazon and through your local bookstores. Look for The Swipe Right Effect, the power to get unstuck. Kelly's interviews with 10 friends from around the world unlock powerful truths to getting your new life started.